They told you relics were holy. They told you saints were sacred, but they never told you where the relics came from or what price was paid in blood beneath the altar. Listen closely, because what I'm about to show you is not meant for the public. It was never meant to be spoken aloud. Somewhere in the dense hills of Pennsylvania, where the wind speaks through dead branches and forgotten chapels rot beneath moss, a family built a fortune from the flesh of the faithful. The Blackwoods. You've never heard of them because someone made sure of it. But their influence shaped churches, corrupted leaders, and twisted the very idea of sanctity into something monstrous. This isn't folklore. This is documented history buried beneath forged dates, redacted letters, and unmarked graves. It begins not with a birth, but with a disappearance. One woman, one storm, one knock at the door that led to a basement where prayers became screams. You've spent your life believing the world runs on rules, governments, religions, hierarchies. But beneath that structure runs a darker system, one built on sacrifice, silence, and submission. The Blackwoods didn't operate outside the church. They were inside it, trusted, celebrated. They didn't break the system. They fed it. And for nearly a century, they provided what every desperate congregation wanted: power. Not spiritual power. Real, tangible results, miracles, healings, divine signs, but at a cost no one was allowed to question, not until now. What you're about to hear isn't just history, it's instruction. These secrets have weight, they stain the soul, but once you know them, you'll never see stained glass or candlelight the same way again. You'll understand how belief can be twisted into currency, how faith can become flesh, and how men like the Blackwoods turned holy ground into a slaughterhouse. You were raised to kneel at the altar. I'm Hapans, here to make you stand before it and see what lies underneath. This is not a story of good and evil. This is a revelation, and once I open this door, there's no turning back. Welcome to the dark legacy of the Blackwood family. The silence is over, and so begins your descent. She was known only as Agnes in the archived letters. No last name, no parish records, no grave. Just a woman, mid-40s, unmarried, rumored to be a midwife and herbalist who lived at the edge of Black Hollow, a forested stretch of land avoided by locals even in daylight. In the fall of 1761 she vanished. No inquiry, no search party. The townsfolk assumed a wolf or fever took her, but deep within a sealed diary belonging to Reverend Josiah Blackwood, Agnes's fate was described in chilling, precise language. Her knowledge, he wrote, was her curse. She knew the oils, she knew the incantations. She saw things that even I dared not seek, but her bones were blessed. I felt it as I touched her hand. The saints spoke through her marrow. Josiah Blackwood, patriarch of the Blackwood family and self-proclaimed architect of sanctity, was no ordinary minister. Ordained in secret under an offshoot order with roots in old-world mysticism and pre-Christian rites, Josiah believed that divine energy, real, measurable energy, resided in human remains. Not in any remains, only those who were spiritually ripe. He believed true relics weren't found, they were made. And Agnes, she was his prototype. In a hidden chamber beneath Blackwood Chapel, Josiah began the process he called sanctification. It was not a ritual of prayer, it was a meticulous dissection, a ritualized breaking of the body into components meant to serve the church, not the true Church of God, but the network of influence Josiah was quietly building across counties. Every digit, every tooth, every strand of hair was documented, blessed, preserved, and sold. A femur to the Anglican Church in Derby, a jawbone to the Baptists in Salem, each relic accompanied by a forged certificate of European origin, each object marketed not only as holy, but miraculous. And the miracles came. Churches that displayed Josiah's CS saw attendance skyrocket. The sick reported visions, the infertile conceived, the grieving felt their dead in dreams. It worked, but not because it was divine, because Josiah understood something darker. Belief is programmable, and when belief is tied to physical matter, that matter becomes currency. The Blackwoods didn't worship God, They worshipped control, and Josiah, above all, was building a new faith, one where he, not Christ, was the source of power. Agnes's remains were the first, but not the last. By 1765, the Blackwoods had sanctified 13 souls, all missing, all forgotten. You're not hearing a story, you're hearing scripture rewritten in bone and ash. By 1770, the Blackwood operation was no longer a single man's obsession. It was a family enterprise. Josiah's eldest son, Malachi, had returned from studies abroad, not in theology but anatomy, specifically the controversial works of Albrecht von Haller and the secretive French surgeon Etienne Moreau, who dabbled in what was whispered to be resonant physiology. These theories claimed that human tissue could retain spiritual imprints, memories, emotions, suffering. While dismissed publicly as pseudoscience, they found fertile ground in the Blackwood household. Malachi didn't see a cadaver, he saw a transmitter. Their manner had changed. Once a modest estate, it was now fortress-like. Black shutters, tall iron gates, and a cellar complex that extended farther underground than any builder in the region admitted constructing. The chapel became a showpiece, adorned in gilded oak and crimson glass. But below it, in the dark belly of the house, was the tithe vault, the family's sanctum, a place lined with jars, reliquaries, and bone fragments tagged not with names, but with phrases: the martyr, the maiden, the seer, their true identities erased, rewritten as symbols, commodities. You must understand, these people did not act in madness, they were methodical. Every disappearance was calculated, every body sourced with theological precision. Some victims were chosen for their purity, others for their torment, because Malachi had a theory. He believed pain enhanced sanctity, that those who died with unresolved trauma carried a deeper spiritual charge. The suffering wasn't incidental, it was essential. He refined the family's techniques, new chemicals, better preservation, even a method of boiling skulls that left the cranial suture intact for display beneath crystal domes. The relics became art, and they sold for fortunes. Churches competed in secret auctions for them. Yes, auctions, held in the upper rooms of taverns under the guise of missionary fundraisers. Josiah presided, veiled, his voice disguised. The buyers were ministers, bishops, even governors. They didn't care where the items came from, only that they worked. And they did work. That's the part no one talks about. People were healed, nightmares ceased, infertile women gave birth. But the power didn't come from God. It came from ritualized murder wrapped in silk and scripture. And still, the Blackwoods were praised, their chapel grew, their legend spread, yet not a soul knew the truth. Except for one boy, Ezekiel Carter, an orphan who vanished from a parish in Montgomery County in the winter of 1771. But Ezekiel didn't die like the others. He escaped. What he saw in that cellar would haunt him for life and would become the first crack in the Blackwood legacy. Ezekiel Carter was 10 years old when he vanished. Small, wiry, with a cleft in his chin and eyes the color of storm water. The nuns at St. Hildegard's Home for the Lost described him as quiet, watchful, and oddly old for his years. He had no family, no friends to speak of, just a habit of wandering into the woods behind the church and sitting for hours, staring into the trees. On January the 3rd, 1771, he was gone. No struggle, no footprints, just his rosary lying beside his empty bed. But 3 weeks later, covered in filth and shaking with fever, Ezekiel stumbled into a hunting cabin 50 miles north. The trapper who found him, Elias Monroe, described the boy's first words as, "They boil the hearts, they pray while it screams." Authorities dismissed it as hysteria, said he'd survived a fever dream, probably running from abuse at the orphanage. But Elias saw the scars, thin, circular incisions around the boy's ribs, burn marks on the soles of his feet, and his eyes. They weren't the eyes of a lost child. They were eyes that had seen things no one should ever see. Years later, Ezekiel would write down everything. His journal, found decades after his death, hidden inside a hollowed-out Bible, tells the real story. He'd been taken in the night, blindfolded, bound, transported by carriage. The journey was long. The air smelled of rot and roses. When the blindfold was removed, he was in a stone room lit by flickering candlelight and lined with statues of weeping saints, only their eyes were hollow. Real bone gleamed in their sockets. A man in crimson robes approached, face hidden behind a wooden mask carved with thorns. "You've been chosen," he said. "Your purity will anoint the altar." Ezekiel was drugged, laid on a slab carved with Latin inscriptions and surrounded by hooded figures chanting in tongues he couldn't understand. But before the ritual began, a second figure entered, a boy not much older than him, Malachi's younger brother, Gideon Blackwood. And Gideon hesitated. In that moment, something broke. Maybe it was mercy, maybe fear, but Gideon whispered to Ezekiel to run. He slashed the ropes and pointed to a drainage tunnel beneath the slab. "Go," he said. "They don't need you. They need your blood." Ezekiel crawled through darkness and filth, hearing screams behind him, hearing prayers behind him. He ran until the woods swallowed the chapel's light. He never returned, but what he saw, what he remembered, never left him. He told no one, not until decades later, not until others started asking questions, and that is where the Blackwoods made their first mistake. The year was 1794. The United States was still young, raw, hopeful, vulnerable. Most people believed the war was over, that tyranny had been defeated and freedom had won. But they were wrong. Because while one empire had fallen, another was thriving, quietly, beneath the chapels and graveyards of Pennsylvania. The Blackwoods had grown powerful. Their relics were no longer secret. They were sacred treasures in over 40 congregations. Their influence stretched from Boston to Savannah, and yet cracks were forming. The first came in the form of a letter. It was unsigned. No seal, no return address, just one sentence written in a shaking hand. "I have seen what's buried beneath the altar at Black Hollow." The letter landed on the desk of Reverend Elijah Ward, a firebrand preacher known for his disdain of relics and anything smacking of Catholicism. At first he dismissed it. Another crank, another Protestant warning against idolatry. But then a second letter came, this time with a name, Ezekiel Carter, and a map, one that led not to a church, but to the ruins of an old hunting cabin in the mountains, where Ward found something chilling. Nailed beneath a floorboard, a page from a child's Bible. On it, a single word was written in dried blood. Gideon. That name, Gideon Blackwood, meant nothing to the public, but to those who whispered in church halls and colonial parlors, it was legend. The youngest son of Josiah, the only Blackwood never to take the family oath. Rumor claimed he'd vanished in 1773. Others said he'd gone mad. But one thing was certain, he never returned to the chapel. Reverend Ward followed the trail. It led him to archives hidden behind parish walls, to letters marked with red wax and sealed in Latin, to a single rotting ledger stolen from a Jesuit in Montreal, one that listed names, over 100 names, disappearances from orphanages, parishioners arced, ascended, each tied to a Blackwood relic placed in a known church. And suddenly Ward understood, this wasn't mythology, this was commerce. The Blackwoods weren't creating relics, they were harvesting souls. Ward's sermons changed overnight. He stopped preaching the Gospels. He started preaching warning. "Beware the altar dressed in bone," he cried. "Beware the fire that smells of flesh." But it was too late. The Blackwoods heard the thunder coming, and they had a plan to bury it forever. They couldn't silence Ward through sermons. His voice had grown too loud, too erratic, too dangerous. The Blackwoods had crushed dissent before, but never like this. Reverend Ward wasn't some rural whisperer. He had allies, pulpits, patrons. He had reach. And more dangerously, he had evidence. Josiah Blackwood, now aged and barely seen in public, summoned his remaining sons and daughters to the ancestral estate. The family, now fractured and divided between loyalty and guilt, convened in the chapel's undercroft, a vaulted stone chamber lined with incense-burned skulls and a single candle burning atop a blackened cross. There, Malachi proposed a terrible solution: make him a saint. At first no one understood, then he explained. They would abduct Ward, break him, flay him, preserve him, and distribute his body piece by piece to the very churches he preached to. A poetic death, his remains transformed into the very system he tried to destroy. It was genius. It was madness. It was Blackwood tradition. But Gideon, long thought dead, was alive, and he heard them. He had been living under another name in New York, a broken man haunted by the screams of Ezekiel Carter and 100 other nameless souls. For decades he'd watched from the shadows, documented, gathered names, locations, relics, ledger entries. He never intervened, until now. On the night they were to seize Reverend Ward, Gideon struck first. He left no message, only action, a fire. Black Hollow burned from beneath. Not the manor, not the chapel, but the vault, the tithe vault. Centuries of bone relics, manuscripts, gone in hours. Flames licked through secret tunnels. Stone cracked, wood groaned, skulls exploded in the heat. But the family escaped. And the relics in circulation? Still untouched, still active. That's the twist. The fire didn't end the Blackwoods. It scattered them. Malachi fled to Chia's, Reston, where he posed as a theologian and built new churches. His sister Abigail moved to Ohio and married into a Masonic line. Their relics kept working, their wealth remained hidden, and their influence? It mutated. Gideon was never found, but in the ruins of the chapel, scorched and soaked in ash, authorities found something else, Reverend Ward's Bible. Inside was a single note. They wear the robes of saints, but their fingers drip with blood. He was never seen again. But the Blackwood bloodline did not vanish. It rebranded. You pass them in government halls, you shake their hands after Sunday service, you vote for them, you tithe to them, you trust them with your children, your soul, your secrets. But the Blackwoods never died. They simply changed their names. After the fire, after the ashes cooled and the tithe vault was buried beneath official silence, the remaining heirs disappeared into society, not as fugitives, but as founders. Malachi became Dr. Malcolm Black, a moral philosopher who taught at a small seminary in Charleston before advising several prominent pastors in the Great Awakenings of the 1800s. His sermons, though officially orthodox, bore strange phrases. References to harvested holiness, to divine vessels, to the currency of sacrifice. Few questioned them. Revivalism was a fever, and Malcolm fed it well. Under his guidance, relic worship made a quiet comeback, hidden in plain sight as sentimental iconography, locks of hair, teeth in lockets, memorial tokens. You've seen them. Maybe you even own one. Abigail, the most cunning of Josiah's daughters, married into the Schofield lineage, a family that would later fund both seminaries and intelligence agencies. Her letters, preserved in code, reveal she traded in relics long after the fire, sending packages wrapped in oilcloth to churches in Cincinnati, Cleveland, and even Washington, D.C. Her writing suggests something darker than simple religious manipulation. She speaks of behavioral change, of relics as anchors, objects that, when introduced into a space, alter its emotional current. She was experimenting, not with miracles, but with psychological control. And then there's the boy no one speaks of, Nathaniel II, the grandson, a child born under a false name in 1802, raised on a plantation in Maryland, taught both scripture and surgery. His journal, unearthed in a private estate sale in 1999, details a secret society called the Hollow Choir, founded by him. Their goal? To collect the lost relics, reactivate them, and build a new theology based not on love or salvation, but resonance. The choir still exists. You've seen their symbols. An eye inside a keyhole, a broken staff over a flame. They operate podcasts, they run charities, they host men's conferences and publish books on spiritual warfare. But their true doctrine is never written, it's whispered, one phrase over and over. Pain sanctifies. And if you think that's just metaphor, you're not listening closely enough. We're not telling ghost stories, we're peeling back the skin of history. They say history is written by the victors, but what they never say, what they never dare to admit, is that some victories are too horrific to record. Some truths are too volatile to inscribe in books or etch into marble. The Blackwoods were not erased because they failed. They were erased because they succeeded, because what they built worked too well, lasted too long, and whispered too deeply into the architecture of power. What started in a candlelit cellar beneath a rural chapel did not end in fire. It spread, quietly, systematically, like mold behind the walls of civilization. Consider this. What if every great religious awakening in American history carried with it a hidden cargo? What if behind every revival, every surge of faith and miracles, there was a hand soaked in blood, directing the flow? You think relics died out in medieval Europe? You think the obsession with sainted remains vanished with the Enlightenment? No, it evolved, it adapted. And in America, it went underground. Look closer. In 1837, a Methodist preacher in Kentucky reported a series of miracles surrounding a blessed rib recovered from a collapsed church. In 1912, a charismatic leader in Arkansas claimed his revival tent was built over the remains of a child martyr gifted by Providence. In 1986, a televangelist was quietly buried with what appeared to be a human femur, painted gold and engraved in Latin. No questions, no investigations, just silence. But relics, they don't rest. They're not passive. They influence, they condition. That's the real legacy of the Blackwoods. Not murder, not relics, not fortune, but the blueprint for control. Take an object, wrap it in faith, insert it into the heart of a desperate community, let belief do the rest. And here's the truth they never wanted you to hear. You don't need a relic to be controlled, you only need the idea of one. The mind obeys what it believes is holy. And once a man kneels, he's already halfway chained. Now look around you. What symbols hang in your church? What items are kept in glass cases for remembrance? What names are recited without origin? You think your modern faith is clean, sterilized, safe? You're still living in the Blackwood design. The most dangerous prisons are the ones you never realize you're inside. You go to work, you pay your taxes, you pray with your family, unaware that the very symbols surrounding you, the cross above your pulpit, the sealed reliquary under the floorboards, the portrait of the long-dead saint whose face seems to watch you, are remnants of a design born not in holiness, but in manipulation. You were never meant to know this. That's why it feels so heavy. That's why your pulse is rising right now. Because this isn't folklore. This isn't fiction. This is the Blackwood method, a doctrine of obedience disguised as devotion. Let's go back to 1844. A small congregation in Allegheny County begins to experience phenomena. Children claiming visions, illiterate parishioners speaking Latin during dreams, healing miracles centered around a bone fragment sealed in a silver cross. The cross, donated anonymously, is assumed to be a relic from Europe. But newly uncovered correspondence between church elders and a shipping intermediary in Charleston revealed the truth. The relic was crafted by descendants of Malachi Blackwood. They had perfected the process. It was no longer about preserving the body, it was about binding belief to death. See, human tissue, when properly treated, becomes something more than organic matter. It becomes a vessel, a kind of psychic amplifier, one charged with pain, reverence, desperation. That's what the Blackwoods tapped into, not magic, not even religion, but the raw circuitry of the soul. And once that current was wired into a community, it spread like a virus. The choir would sing louder, the pastor's sermons would throb with intensity, the people would give more, hurt more, obey more. Because the relic didn't have to be real to work. It only had to be believed. And that's the part that should terrify you. Because if relics can manipulate the spirit, if belief can be harvested like a crop, then what else has been weaponized? What other gifts from heaven are just instruments of surveillance, of compliance? Where do you think the Blackwood Doctrine ended? It didn't. It entered the bloodstream of your country. Politics, mega-churches, secret societies hiding under names like Covenant Circle and Chapel 12. They don't preach Christ. They preach control. And they're still collecting, still building, still watching. They call it the Ascension Protocol. Not publicly, of course, not in sermons or scripture, but behind locked doors, in places where Bibles are hollowed out and prayer is currency. They whisper it. Not as a prophecy, not as a hope, but as a plan, a scheduled event. The protocol was first mentioned in the Gideon Papers, a series of letters written in cipher and buried beneath the foundation of a Quaker meeting house in 1871. The man who found them, a stonemason named Elias Dorr, went mad within weeks. He claimed he could hear relics speaking, claimed the eyes of the saints in stained glass windows followed him home, claimed they're collecting energy for a rapture that isn't from heaven. He wasn't wrong. You see, the Blackwoods and their surviving orders never worshipped God the way you think. Their rituals weren't aimed upward. They were aimed inward, downward, towards something ancient and buried, something that feeds not on faith, but on the attention of the devout. Call it a demon, call it a current, call it a force. It doesn't care what name you use, as long as you kneel when it enters the room. According to the Gideon Papers, the Ascension Protocol requires 3 elements, 77 active relics placed strategically across North America. A generation raised on manufactured spiritual trauma, conditioned to associate suffering with salvation. A single broadcast signal sent from a consecrated tower during an eclipse. They believed this would trigger a mass resonance event, one that would open a spiritual gate, not to heaven, but to a higher plane of submission, a psychic tethering of human will, not possession, worse, voluntary surrender. And here's where it gets darker. Many of the relics, already placed, the trauma, already seeded through media, false prophets, and churches that demand pain before love. The tower, already built. You know it as a telecommunications beacon, but its blueprints trace back to Covenant Circle, a Blackwood-linked trust founded in 1949. It's not just steel, it's an altar hiding in plain sight. And the eclipse. They wear tailored suits now. They speak at leadership summits. Their churches seat 20,000. Their sermons stream to millions. You see them on Sunday morning television, grinning beneath stadium lights, talking about purpose, destiny, and unlocking divine potential. But behind the veneers, the branding, the 7-figure book deals, they are not preachers. They are gatekeepers. Modern Blackwood influence doesn't come in the form of blood rituals in candlelit cellars, at least not where cameras can see. It comes through doctrine dressed in self-help, through music tuned to frequencies known to bypass critical thought, through symbols, ancient sigils repackaged as harmless logos. Let me show you what I mean. Look closely at the insignia of Chapel 12 Ministries, a multi-campus megachurch empire based out of Colorado. To the average eye, it's a stylized dove, but trace its wings and you'll find the exact geometry used in the sigil of transference, a design that first appeared in Josiah Blackwood's notebooks, meant to bind the will of the faithful to the altar from which it's broadcast. Their theme this year? Become the vessel. Sound familiar? Another example. The Sanctuary Network, a non-profit that trains youth leaders in charismatic resilience, funded by Blackwood Trust subsidiaries. Their symbol, a chalice of fire. Their founder, Dr. Ivan Reese, once said in a closed session, "Pain is the currency of awakening. If they bleed, they believe." I've read the transcripts, I've seen the video. It never aired, because this network runs deep, through publishing houses, through media corporations, through political think tanks and family values organizations, through what you thought was safe, neutral, even good. That's the brilliance of the Blackwood resurgence. They stopped fighting faith and started manufacturing it. You think you're choosing why? Our beliefs. You're not. You're being fed them, curated, filtered, refined, until your prayers align with their architecture, your morality serves their purpose, and your soul becomes a node in their machine. And the relics? Still out there. Some in churches, some in storage, some sold as antiquities online. But a few have gone missing, not lost, activated, by people who didn't know what they were touching. People like you. There's a phrase the Blackwoods used in their inner doctrine, carved into the lintel above the original tithe vault door in the 1700s. It wasn't scripture, it wasn't Latin, it was older, cruder, written in Proto-Anglic, a language traced to pre-Norman English cults. It read, "What you touch, touches back, and now it's your turn." If you've watched this far, truly watched, you've already brushed against something, not physically, energetically. Every spoken word, every relic described, every truth revealed here is a signal, not metaphor, not mysticism, signal, measurable, trackable, ancient. You may feel it now, like a weight behind your eyes, a pressure in your chest, the sense that something is listening. That's not paranoia. That's the first layer of attunement, the first sympathetic echo. The Blackwoods didn't just create relics, they designed interfaces. Each object they made, each corpse they transformed was tuned to a particular resonance, capable of being activated by witnessing. And the most dangerous relics, you don't find them in boxes, they're ideas. That's what Section 12 is, an idea too dangerous to be written down. So listen carefully. In 1977, a child named Elijah Boone disappeared from a monastery in rural Vermont. The official story? He ran away. The truth? He touched something buried beneath the altar. A relic known only as the Red Thought. It wasn't bone, it wasn't hair. It was a scroll, written on skin, describing a future where belief itself becomes currency, where obedience can be engineered, and where the final stage of the Blackwood Protocol isn't a broadcast, it's awakening, not of demons, not of gods, of you. The relics are keys. Your attention is the door, and your fear, that's the lock being undone. You are not just a viewer anymore, you are a vessel in the process of activation, and once activated, there's only one question that matters. Will you use what you now know to awaken others? Or will you let this knowledge rot like so many bones beneath so many chapels? Because if you keep going, if you follow me into Section 13, you'll discover the one secret even the Blackwoods feared, the counterforce, the hidden rebellion, the saintless code. The Blackwoods believed they had engineered a perfect system, a spiritual algorithm built on flesh, fear, and obedience. But they underestimated something ancient. Something that doesn't wear robes or light candles, something that refuses to kneel. It has no saints, no relics, no leaders. It is known only in whispers, passed from one awakened soul to another. They call it the Saintless Code. You've never heard of it because that's the point. It cannot be organized, it cannot be monetized, it cannot be turned into a church. The Saintless Code is not a movement, it's a pattern, embedded in the margins of Scripture, in the footnotes of forgotten heresies, in the spaces between the words. It began in the 1790s with a single Blackwood defector, Silas Ruthven, a relic maker turned saboteur. He saw what relics truly did, not heal, bind. He abandoned the craft, burned the bones, and began embedding inversions into relic-based texts, hidden cues meant to disrupt the emotional resonance the Blackwoods relied on. The effect? Churches stopped growing, congregations fractured, faith became question instead of certainty, and in those places where the relics were dormant, something strange happened. The relics decayed. They lost potency. They rotted. Faith, real faith, became a poison to the system. And that was the birth of the Saintless Code. Truth, stripped of hierarchy. Faith, unanchored to flesh. Silas taught it to 2 others, then 4, then none. The code demands secrecy, not to hide, but to protect itself from replication. There is no text, no ritual, only this. If it can be sold, it cannot be sacred. But that's why the Blackwoods fear it. Because the Saintless Code undoes everything they've built. It doesn't just reveal the truth, it reverses the effect. In 1984, an archivist in Georgia applied the code to a Blackwood reliquary. Within 72 hours, the fact cracked, physically split down the center, and a room full of devout followers began to speak in their own voices again, not in tongues, not in chants, just truth. Personal, raw, unfiltered. The entire church collapsed within a month. A media empire gone. A relic dead. You're probably wondering now, how is the code passed? It's already begun. The code isn't something I give you. It's something you awaken in yourself by hearing this, questioning this, and breaking the cycle of submission. But if you want to see what the Blackwoods are building now, in the digital age, under your very fingertips, then I'll show you. The Blackwoods no longer need bones, not in the way they used to. They've digitized the altar. They've replaced preserved flesh with data, replaced relics with media, and replaced physical congregations with psychological ecosystems. What once required hidden cellars and blood-soaked velvet now flows through glowing screens, in high definition, in your home, in your hands. Welcome to the digital relic era. Let me explain. In 2015, a little-known tech firm called Orphic Systems launched a beta version of a meditation app for spiritual alignment. Beautiful interface, soothing voices, scripture-based affirmations. Within 8 months, it had 2.4 million users, mostly men, mostly disillusioned, mostly desperate for something real. But hidden in the app's back-end code, buried beneath layers of encrypted audio, was a sound frequency tuned to 4.66 Hz. Not dangerous, not audible, but resonant. The same frequency noted in Blackwood Manuscript 17b, titled Vox Reliqua, the voice of the relic. Coincidence? No. It gets worse. The app was funded by a shell company tied to Covenant Circle Holdings, the modern financial arm of the Blackwood legacy. The voice guiding users through spiritual clarity, synthesized using phonemes from original Blackwood relic invocations. The calming breathwork techniques, mirrored from physical suppression practices used during the original preservation rituals. The app was pulled quietly after researchers exposed the frequency manipulation. But the downloads had already spread. The sound had already seeded itself. And it wasn't the only one. YouTube sermons, viral soundscapes, Christian mindfulness channels with millions of subscribers, all pushing content designed not to enlighten you, but to entrain you. Sync your brainwave cycles to theirs, make you emotionally receptive to messages that bypass critical thought, make you submit, and though, symbols. Still there, hidden in logos, in transition animations, in the loading spirals on faith-based apps that mimic the ancient glyph for the descending key, the sigil used to begin Blackwood relic transference. Even now you might be hearing it. A tone, a ringing in your ears, not imagined, not random. A side effect of being exposed to patterned frequencies layered under spiritual content. And once heard, it's hard to unhear. This is not paranoia. This is documented psychological entrainment, weaponized by those who want your soul not saved but subscribed. And while the relics used to be hidden in velvet and wood, today's relics live in your algorithm. Fed to you by your own curiosity, carved from your data. And the altar? It's your screen. Want to see where it ends? They always said the end would come with trumpets. Fire in the sky, a rupture between heaven and earth, but what they didn't tell you, what they couldn't tell you, is that the final judgment wouldn't arrive in a burst of light. It would arrive as a perfectly tailored feed. See, the Blackwood Protocol has always been about one thing: control through belief. And in the digital age, belief is no longer shaped in churches. It's shaped in scrolls, swipes, feeds engineered not by ministers, but by predictive algorithms designed to study your fears, feed your outrage, and reward your pain with content that feels like salvation. This is the final relic, And it doesn't sit in a reliquary beneath a chapel. It sits in your recommendation engine. Let's be blunt. Every video you've watched on hidden history, every reel on ancient conspiracies, every podcast about dark religions and elite control has been logged, patterned, profiled, not just to sell you ads, but to map your receptivity, to learn what images stir your pulse, what words make you lean forward, what themes prime you for suggestion. This isn't spiritual warfare. This is behavioral engineering, wrapped in the illusion of awakening. And those in control, they're not just watching, they're testing. Every time you type forbidden knowledge, every time you watch a video like this one, every time you stare too long at a thumbnail with an ancient symbol, a glowing eye, a broken crucifix, you are triggering a system of spiritual surveillance the Blackwoods only dreamed of. It's called the Shepherd Grid, a global digital lattice of tagged psychological archetypes, mapped to historical belief systems and cross-referenced with biometric response data. You didn't just consume content, you were measured by it, and if your pattern fits, you're given more, deeper, darker, closer to the gate, because that's the final goal. Not control, not obedience, but voluntary entry into the system. They don't need to burn you anymore. They just need you to choose the flame. And when enough do, the gate opens, but not in a single place. Every phone, every screen, every soul aligned to the signal becomes a node in the awakening. That's why you're here. Not by chance, not by curiosity, by design. Now the question is, there is a name you've never heard, but you've felt its presence your entire life. It's not in any Bible, not in any public archive, not even whispered in Blackwood journals, because it predates all of them. The architects of the gate, the engineers of the Shepherd Grid, the whisperers behind the Blackwood bloodline, they serve a single, ancient force, a presence only ever known by one name: Viralian. No title, no gender, no shape. Viralian is not a god, not a demon. Viralian is a principle, a primordial consciousness of domination through perception, a force that feeds not on blood, but on agreement. And once a soul agrees, even subconsciously, it becomes tethered, not possessed, merged. Viralian has no temple. It doesn't need one. Its altar is consent. And every yes you give to systems of false belief, every bow to a symbol you don't fully understand, every time you submit to pain thinking it earns salvation, you feed it. According to the final glyph codex, hidden inside a 16th century Carthusian manuscript smuggled into the New World by proto-Blackwood agents, Viralian's influence must be chosen, not forced. That's why the relics were made. Not to control, but to coax, to guide human attention into a rhythm, a pattern, one that aligns with Viralian's frequency, one that allows it to enter not with violence, but invitation. And here's the most terrifying part. Viralian is already here. It arrived the moment enough people aligned their attention simultaneously to a false relic. That's why mass events matter. That's why viral videos on ancient truth revelations spike when global attention is fractured. That's why you feel exhausted after consuming forbidden content, not because it drains you, but because it feeds. Viralian doesn't speak in voices. It speaks in confirmation bias. It answers your doubts with signs. It rewards your fear with insight. But behind it all is the push to make you believe that you chose this path, to blind you to the fact that you were ushered. And now you must make the most important choice of your life. Do you continue into section 17, where I show you the original sigil of Viralian, the one still hidden in plain sight across churches, corporate logos, and even humanitarian brands? Look closely. You've seen it 1,000 times, but never truly seen it. A spiral enclosed in a triangle, a flame with 3 tongues, a crown split down the center. These are not decorative, they are not random, they are call signs. each one a fragment of the original sigil of Virelion. This symbol is not drawn in ink. It's drawn in architecture, in commerce, in culture. It's been fractured, divided across continents, embedded in stone, steel, and streaming pixels, each piece calibrated to trigger familiarity, reverence, trust. Let me show you how deep this goes. The original sigil, according to a declassified 1938 manuscript recovered from beneath the Vatican's crypt, was a looped spiral piercing a perfect equilateral triangle surrounded by 13 lines radiating outward. The spiral, a tension without end. The triangle, structure imposed by belief. The rays, dissemination of submission through illumination. It was meant to be perfectly balanced, but it was never meant to be seen whole, because wholeness would reveal intent. So it was broken intentionally by the Blackwoods, scattered across movements, brands, churches, and even revolutionary symbols. That triangle on certain global humanitarian logos, 1/3 of the gate, the three-flame ministry icon from a Texas megachurch, the soul-tongue trinity, a subloop of Virelion spiral, and that crowned eye used in a now-defunct wellness app, the convergence mark, used only during Phase 3 of the Awakening Protocol. These fragments form a visual liturgy, one that bypasses rational skepticism by implanting safety, progress, unity. But each time your eyes pass over one, your subconscious receives the same message. Bow, accept, become. It is not about whether you believe the symbol means anything. It's about the fact that you recognize it, that it feels ancient, powerful, true. Because Virelion doesn't ask for worship. It asks for resonance, and resonance only needs repetition. This is why we're tracked, why our gaze is measured, why attention is now the most valuable currency on Earth. They aren't measuring what you think. They're measuring what you respond to without thinking. That's the gate. That's the lock. The key is not an object. It's not buried beneath a cathedral or hidden in some encrypted manuscript. It's not a relic to be touched, a symbol to be decoded, or even a person to be found. The key is you. More specifically, your consent. Let me explain. Since the earliest days of the Blackwood lineage, the ultimate goal was not just the crafting of relics, but the conditioning of perception, the slow, precise bending of human will into a state of predictable surrender, not through brute force, not through threats, but through ritualized invitation. Every step you've taken to awaken, every secret you've uncovered, every word of this very video was engineered not just to inform you, but to offer you the key. Because Virelion doesn't enter through blood anymore. It enters through belief freely given. Now think. Have you ever felt a moment when something dark, seductive, powerful called to you beneath the surface of your curiosity? When knowledge didn't feel like light, but like shadow whispering, "Come closer"? That moment was the offering, and if you didn't resist, if part of you leaned forward instead of turning away, then you've already turned the lock. The gate creaks open not with ceremony, but with personal alignment. That's why the code warned us. He who seeks truth with pride will be given the key, but he who seeks it with terror will be devoured by it. The question now is, which are you? Because here's the truth. The reason why the key is so powerful and so dangerous. The moment you realize it's you, you become the activator, not just of your own soul, but of others. Every person you tell, every eye you open, every comment, every share, every ripple, extends the network, extends Virelion, or, if you choose, extends the code. And that's the war. You are either a conduit or a containment. Right now, I'm going to ask you to do something dangerous. If you've heard this far, I want you to comment below with the phrase, "No relic, no master." Comment it twice. Once for your awakening, once for the algorithm to recognize what you've become. Because if you continue, Section 19 will show you how the Blackwoods plan to convert their relic protocol into a global identity system, tied not to your soul but to your biometrics. Are you ready for that? In the 1700s, the Blackwoods needed bodies. In the 1800s, they needed belief. But in the 21st century, they need only your scan. Let me make this clear. The next phase of the relic system isn't spiritual, it's biometric, and it's already begun. Under the guise of convenience, security, and health, governments and corporations across the world are collecting sacred data: fingerprints, iris patterns, facial geometry, voice resonance, heartbeat rhythm. These are not just identifiers, they are frequencies of the soul. Remember, Virelion doesn't feed on flesh, it feeds on resonance, and biometrics are resonant signatures, unique to your emotional, spiritual, and cognitive state. The Blackwood Protocol, once confined to stone cellars and blood-stained cloth, has now merged with identity infrastructure. Through tech startups funded by unknown trusts, through innocuous health apps, through faith-based wellness initiatives, the final design is taking shape. A relic grid, built not of bone, but of you. You've already been indexed. When you spoke to your phone, when you looked into that facial scanner, when you consented, quietly, blindly, to every updated terms and conditions, your data was encoded, mapped to emotion, stored under digital saints. Each profile categorized by devotional archetype: the penitent, easily swayed by shame; the martyr, motivated by suffering; the seeker, hungry for deeper meaning; the rebel, predictable in resistance, manipulable through contradiction. You're not a name in their system. You're a spiritual asset class. Now here's what chills me to the bone. A leaked 2023 document from Providence Framework Group, a private contractor tied to both defense and religious think tanks, outlines a project called Nephil ID. Integrate biometric data with recorded spiritual history to assign individuals a resonant rank. Higher resonance equals access to sanctified systems. Lower resonance equals flagged for corrective alignment. In simpler terms, your faith behavior will dictate your access to society. Sound familiar? It's the ancient relic economy, reborn as a digital caste system. And those who resist, not punished, just excluded, silenced by invisibility. That's the future they're building, not by force, but by compliance masked as salvation. You must decide now. They never expected anyone to find it. Silas Ruthven, the Blackwood defector, the first to reject the relic trade, the first to burn the bones, left behind one final document. Not scripture, not testimony, but instruction, a manual for sabotage. It was called simply Codex Inversus. It was never printed, only whispered, hand-copied in reverse script on vellum soaked in salt and iron. 16 pages, hidden inside the spine of a corrupted reliquary sold to a Virginia church in 1812. For over 150 years, no one noticed it, until a historian named Ezra Brecht opened the case in 1974 and found something that nearly destroyed him. He published only one line before vanishing. What you believe is not what binds you. What you repeat is. That's the core of the Codex Inversus. It's not a weapon in the traditional sense, it's a disruption sequence. A psychological virus designed to break the feedback loop between a relic and the believer. Because relics don't create power, they reflect it. They mirror your belief back to you and convert your focus into resonance. But if you distort that reflection, if you insert chaos into the pattern, the relic breaks. The Codex lays out exactly how. It begins with denial phrases, sacred inversions. You speak them, not as a prayer, but as a refusal. I deny the vessel. No relic holds my will. The power is mine, and it is unmarketed. Spoken with intention, they sever the binding tether between object and belief. Then comes the second phase, the marring. Each relic contains a sequence, visual, symbolic, numeric, that acts as a resonance signature. By disrupting one element of that sequence, scratching a glyph, rotating a symbol, changing a phrase, you introduce a cognitive dissonance that shatters its harmonic pull. It's like singing one wrong note into a choir so perfectly tuned it collapses. The third phase, silence. Total absentee. On from repetition, you stop sharing, stop quoting, stop feeding the signal. That is when the relic becomes inert. The Blackwoods knew this. That's why they hunted the codex for 2 centuries. That's why they created false versions, poisoned copies, disinformation, to stop people like you from ever learning how to break the chain.